Just a little taste of the 80s there for you today. We're so glad you're here. Welcome to North Shore. I'm Wolfgang. I work here. And I know whether for you, your rhythm of life is sort of living for the weekends, kind of trying to get through your week so you get to those little islands of sanity when you can kind of relax and do your thing. Or maybe your rhythm of life is such that weekend. What's a weekend? Because it just feels like the work is never done and you can never clock out. You can never slow down. You can never step away. Now, there are people who are trying to get to the weekend. Others, it just never comes. This week, I was reading an interview recently done with Elon Musk, the celebrity CEO of Tesla and SpaceX and 47 other companies I think he's probably started. But he was describing a particularly busy season they'd recently been in Tesla, where he said he's been consistently working 120 hours a week. And he famously gets very little sleep. People have written about this. He sleeps only less than 6 hours a day. He said during that period, there were times when he never even left the factory. He just stayed day after day after day and sometimes snuck a nap underneath his desk. But the thing that sparked the most reaction from him was when Musk tweeted this. He said, "Nobody changed the world working 40 hours a week," he said. Sort of throwing down the gauntlet. People pushed him on this. Well, what do you think? How long do you think it takes to make that kind of impact? He said later in the thread, it requires somewhere in the range of 80 to over 100 hours a week. Now, some of you hear that and you think, I'm kind of driven, but at least I'm not that bad, right? See, honey, it could be worse, right? That sort of thing. But there were all kinds of reactions to Musk's tweets. Some people admired him. They commended him for his devotion, his ambition, his creativity. He's a hero to many, some in this room, I know. But some were a little more critical. Regularly working 80 to 100 hours a week, 120 hours a week, think about this for a second. That is 17 hours, 7 days a week. That's how much that is. It's extreme. But in reality, it's actually only an extreme example of what sometimes is the message that we can pick up in our world. That if you want your life to matter, right, to change the world, if you want your life to count for something significant, then you have to be willing to work insanely long hours. You have to produce mind-blowing success after mind-blowing success. If you want your life to really count. And if you're not willing to do that, well, what can we say about you? Because life is all about what we can achieve, what we can acquire. And most people never really stop and ask this question, is that true? Is the ultimate value of life what we can achieve and what we can acquire? Or are there things that matter most? And most folks, if you had that conversation, would admit, certainly there are many things that matter a whole lot more than that. And yet, when you look at our lives can be our work. We give our very best efforts and our best time to being successful. And then the leftovers, the scraps, are what we wind up giving to these other things, like our relational life, like our spiritual life, our family life. And this is true whatever your workplace context. Remember, last week, Scott reminded us, our work is more than just clocking in and out or sitting at a desk or working in a factory. Our work could be raising kids. Our work could be our studies at school. It could be decorating or maintaining our house, any of those things. And so in our high pace, high expectation, high pressure, high achieving, successful area, there is incredible pressure to be a success at everything you do. Some of you feel that. I know it's crushing people. Studies show anxiety continues to skyrocket, especially younger generations who just feel the constant pressure to do it all. To have a thriving business, a successful career, to raise perfect kids, to get straight A's, to play premier or select sports, rec league. Who plays rec league, right? To have an immaculate home, to be a success. And there's so much pressure that it causes some people to go to extremes. And pretty soon our work, whether it's in an office or factory or classroom at our house, it shifts from being a profession to an obsession. So I want to talk very directly about what God has to say about that. And to talk about it, I want to share a story that's going to be familiar to some of you, many of you in fact, probably. And it may not seem super related at first, but stick with me. It's recorded in the Old Testament book of Daniel. And so you can turn there, Daniel chapter 3. We'll also tell the story up here on the screen. And incidentally, if you ever need a Bible, after the service, I'll be hanging out over here. I'd love to give you one. But it's a book of Daniel. And what's happening in this story happened centuries ago. There's a king of Babylon called Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar. Big, long name. There won't be a test. You can relax. He captured much of the ancient world, and he would bring the best of the best, sort of the elite up-and-comers, to be part of his court, to sort of be part of, in his internship program, let's put it that way. And he wanted to be sure that everybody in his kingdom, all of these people he brought from far and wide, would be loyal to him. Now, we're going to talk about the things that compete with our loyalties in a second, but we'll begin with their story. So Nebuchadnezzar wants to make sure that all these folks are going to be loyal to him. So he orders this radical thing to be done. He has this massive image that is crafted. It's made of gold, so it sparkles. It stands 90 feet tall, this thing, all right? And 9 feet wide, this impressive, massive statue. And he sends out a herald, an announcer, with this message to everyone that is around. This is Daniel chapter 3, second half of verse 4. It says, "Nations and people of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, harmonica, electric guitar, whatever, all kinds of music, right? You must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." It's a story many of you are familiar with. This sets up a crisis, as some of you know, for 3 guys that are there that day: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These are Israelites. These are people who know the God of the Bible. They know who they're supposed to worship. And the crisis is that they're going to have to face is they've got to decide where their ultimate loyalty is going to go. And here's the critical point. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego this day are going to have to cheat someone. They're going to have to cheat someone. Either they will cheat the king out of what he wants, or they will cheat God out of what he asks for. But they cannot satisfy both. They can't do it all. One way or the other, someone is going to feel cheated. Now, in our day, in our stories, God's rival for most of us is not Nebuchadnezzar or some massive, sparkly statue, all right? What is it for us? It's success, stuff. This is the image that has been erected by our world and culture around us. And we're told, give your total loyalty to success, right? Have it all. Drop everything and focus on that. And of course, no one's going to physically force you to get down and bow. It's more subtle than that. For us, it translates into this: how do we spend our time? That's how we proclaim our ultimate allegiance. It's how we bow down. It's where we put our lives. It's where we put our time. And so in their day, it's a literal golden figure they had to physically bow to. In ours, it's this image of success. And the way we bow down is by how we use our time. You can say whatever you want about what matters to you. What ultimately shows what's important in your life is where you put your time. That tells us what we're focused on, what we're worshiping, if you will. That's why in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul writes this in Ephesians 5. He says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil." Now, quick side note here. Of course, God created the day, and days are a good thing, okay? But our days have this way of sucking us into using our time on things that don't honor God. So Paul says, don't be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Pay attention to your days, because those days add up into a life. So will I use my time in a way that honors God and builds into people, especially the one that God has put closest to me? Or will I just kind of go through life with the busy, frenzied, hurried lifestyle that most people in our culture do? And is this a struggle for anybody else in this room? Anybody? Now, some of you think the reason that you don't get everything done is because you don't have the right schedule, let's say. That if you just had a different schedule, some of you think, if I just had better time management skills, if I was just more disciplined. Can we begin this conversation by just saying, to put you all at ease as we get started today, that is not your problem, all right? You know what your problem is? There is not enough time. There isn't. There is not enough time. You can't do everything. You can't. You are going to have to cheat somewhere. Something calling on your energy or time, you're going to have to cheat it. For instance, think about work. Many of us love our work. God made us for work. Again, Scott talked about that last week. It's a good thing. But the reality is, almost every one of us have more work to do than could ever be done. Some of you are students. You remember that first day of class when you get your syllabus and you flip to see the assignment page, and just after the required reading and assignments, there's a long additional list of books and resources called what? Recommended reading, right? If you really want to take this seriously, you will never read all of those books. You never could. There's not that much time. For those of you, primary work is raising kids or keeping house. Have you found that work ever ends? Is that ever done? Because there's always another meal to prepare, another mess to clean up, another load of laundry to fold. It never ends. And for those who work in a more typical workplace outside the home, think about all of the things you could do with your time. Think about all the meetings that you're requested to attend, all the text messages and emails that you receive, every conference call that you're able or they want you to listen into. Just a stat, the average American worker will spend 3 years of your life just sitting in meetings. Some of you, it's much more than that. It feels like that in my life sometimes. If you wanted to meet with every person you could ever meet, every client, every person, every email, every text, you will never be done. There's just not enough time. And of course, commuting home consumes time. The average American will spend 75 minutes per day commuting. You're going to spend 6 months of your life just sitting at red lights, total in life, right? And those of you that drive up Bothell Everett Highway toward Mill Creek, you'll do that in a year, all right? You'll do that in a year. Whether it's at home, whether it's at work, there is not enough time. In fact, I read an article, this is several years ago, it was in USA Today, in which the writer interviewed experts in all these different fields, vocational life, physical fitness, relationships, sleep, and so on. And he asked each of those experts to tell what is the minimum number that they recommend to be healthy in that arena of life. And then that author combined all those hours to tally up what the required number is, just minimum proficiency. You know what the number was? Almost 40 hours per day. All right? Here's the problem. You don't have 40 hours in a day. You only get 24 to work with. Now, of course, God doesn't have that problem. He's not bound by time because he's eternal. But you're not God. Someone said, not a theologian, they said the big difference between you and God is God never believes he's you. Like, that's the biggest difference, right? Maybe the best place to start this conversation is just by admitting you're not God, okay? In fact, turn to the person next to you and say, I can't help but notice, you're not God. Go ahead, tell them right now. It's all right, tell them. Anybody sitting next to someone who needed to hear that this morning? Is there anyone here? Anyone? No, don't do that. That's a bad thing. So what are we going to do about this? Well, about 15 years ago, there was a pastor out of Atlanta named Andy Stanley who wrote a book called Choosing to Cheat. And it created some stir. People were a bit offended by the title, so they re-released it as When Work and Family Collide. But I like the original title better because it captures the picture. And the idea is that we all have to cheat somewhere. You have to do it because you can't do everything. And of course, he's not talking about cheating in some unethical, like cheating on a test or something like that. Not like the story of the UW football player who's told by his professor that he had flunked this test, even though he'd only missed one question on the test. Some of you maybe have heard this before. And the student asks, why did I flunk? And the professor answers, well, you've been not getting real good grades, but I noticed this day on the test you sat next to one of the brightest kids in class, and he also only got one problem wrong. And the football player explained, no, that's just coincidence, I'm sure. He said, well, it just so happens you missed the exact same question. And again, the football player said, that doesn't mean anything, it's just coincidence. The professor said, well, yeah, but the straight-A student wrote next to the question that was wrong, I don't know this answer, and you wrote, I don't know this answer either. All right? It's not what we're talking about, all right? Different kind of cheating. This is a kind of cheating in this sense. You have to give up certain opportunities in order to take advantage of certain other ones. You can't answer every demand. You can't satisfy every voice. You aren't God. You have limits. You are finite. Somebody in your life is going to feel cheated. Wise people choose who to cheat instead of simply allowing the current, or let's say the music, to force them to bow. Does this make sense? The reality is you don't have enough time. Now, in the biblical story, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they have to decide who are they going to cheat, King Nebuchadnezzar or God. Had to be someone. And in our stories, I have to decide, who am I going to cheat? I don't have enough time. I can't do both. Where in my life am I going to allow someone to feel cheated? And the danger is that we will often allow things we claim to care about the most to pay the highest cheating price. We cheat the things that matter most. Let me give you a picture of this, kind of a parable that comes out of Andy's book. To help explain it, here's a little thing I want to interact with here for a bit. Now, Andy writes about this in the book. I think it's a powerful image, so I want to steal it from him. Imagine someone you love pulls up to your house. It's your best friend. Imagine they pull up to your house, they pop open the trunk, and in the back of that trunk of their car, they pull out a rock that weighs 30 pounds. Now, this one only weighs like 3 maybe, and I love you guys, but I wasn't going to hold a 30-pounder up here for this entire talk, all right? Anyway, he hands you this rock and says, will you hold this for me for a little while? I have some really important things to do. I'm going to be back in about 30 minutes or so. Will you just hold the rock for me? That's kind of a strange request, but you like this guy, right? And so you say, sure, yeah. So you take the rock. He climbs back in the car, drives off. 30 minutes go by, still not back. 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. Now, by this point, the rock is getting very heavy, and you're starting to get a little annoyed. And so at last, the car pulls into the driveway, and he hops out, and he's all chipper. It's like, I got a lot of things to do. Thank you so much for holding into this rock. Nobody holds a rock like you do. So helpful. But it's just going to take me a little longer than I expected. Could you hold the rock for me just a little bit longer, would you? And you're not sure because you're starting to feel tired. But it would sound selfish to say no. So you say, okay. And he leaves. This time, he's gone for a couple of hours. And this time, by now, the situation is getting serious. Your back is sore, your arms are tired. Worse yet, you're not sure you like this friend anymore, all right? You start to resent that you have to hold this rock and that he stuck you with it. Your phone rings. Fortunately, wonderful world of technology, you just tell Siri to answer it for you because your hands are full with this rock. And you talk to him, and your friend says, hey, guess who? Got to tell you, I'm not quite finished yet. I'm going to take me a little bit longer than I thought it would, but you are doing such a great job holding that rock. In fact, I'll bring you a present when I come home. Can you hold it a little bit more? Now, I want to pause here for just a second, okay? Because some of you can see where this story is headed. You see what this parable is about. You know how sometimes during a message, you're sitting next to someone and thinking, they really need to hear this. You ever have that experience? This is particularly relevant to the person that's sitting next to me right now, right? And you're not sure that the Holy Spirit is active enough, right? Bringing enough conviction. So you're tempted to use your elbow to give God a little help to make sure that they are experiencing the conviction you feel they should, all right? This is one of those sections in the talk that I want to call an elbow-free zone on, all right? Just let God talk to you and anybody else he needs to, all right? So back to the rock. By now, your hands are cramping, your shoulders are in agony, your body has reached the breaking point. You cannot hold this rock anymore, and it slips from your fingers and shatters into 1,000 pieces. And just as it drops, guess who pulls up? It's your friend. What happened? How could you let that slip? Why would you let that go? Why the sudden collapse? And you want to explain, man, there is nothing sudden about this, right? You were just ground down, minute by minute, hour by hour. There was not enough strength left for you to hold that rock, even though you're a very strong person. Then comes the collapse. Something really bad happens. Now, I don't think that's a parable that needs a whole lot of explanation. I think it just begs a question. Who's holding the rock? See, when I miss key moments in my kids' lives because I'm too busy, I leave my kids holding the rock. When we ask spouses to be constantly present in our family so that we can be constantly absent, they're holding the rock. When I can't really engage with the people I say I love because I've already given my best energy somewhere else, then they hold the rock. When I say, my spiritual life matters, but I give very little time to ever actually accessing God's Word. I only come to gatherings like this when it's convenient, there's nothing better to do. When I say, caring for others, that's a big deal in my life, but I never actually make time to do something like that, to volunteer, to serve. Who's holding your rock? You see, just like that golden statue in the Bible story, this drive for success is a powerful thing. And the cultural currents, when that music goes off, makes it very easy to bow down. Whether it's succeeding at work, in our studies, to keep a perfect house, playing in every select tournament you can find, success promises all kinds of things. It promises a significance, a sense of ego enhancement. Our identity gets all jumbled up with it. For some things, it even brings us great wealth. So we put our extra time there because we like those returns. And pretty soon we start cheating God and we start cheating people. The very people God has called us to love. So who's holding your rock? Now let's get back to the biblical story here because there's some really insightful things that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have to say in this situation that I think are instructive for us. Take a look at verse 14. They won't bow. Here's what happens. Nebuchadnezzar says to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of all these musical instruments, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be placed on a performance plan." No, that's not what it says, but it's basically the same idea. "You will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" I mean, you think your workplace is bad? At least your boss hasn't erected a 90-foot image of himself yet, right? And yet this is the pressure on them. It's kind of a set-up question. Who will save you from this? What will you do without me? Well, they have an answer. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. Now you notice this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had already made up their minds before they read the next few verses. They don't know how this story ends like we do if we know the story. They don't know how the details are going to be arranged, but the first thing they do is make a decision, even under duress. I will not bow my knee to that statue. Why? Because my God is able. And I say this because I've had so many conversations with people who say, you don't know my situation, man. You don't know my workplace. You understand there's a certain percentage of my coworkers we have to fire every year. I do not want to be in that group. You understand, if I don't work these hours, I'm not going to make it in this company. I work in the real world. And if I were to really spend my time in a sane way to focus on my important relationships as well as my relationship with God in the ways I know I want to, man, there just wouldn't be enough time to carry about all these responsibilities I have. You don't know the details of my life. And you're right, I don't know the details of your life. But I do know what question really matters. Do you believe that if you honor God with your time, if you spend time with him and those you claim to love, do you believe that our God is able to make up whatever gap you think might happen, whether it's in your vocation or financially or in some other way? That's the question. Because this time question is ultimately a trust issue. We'll never get the time thing right unless we start with this. Our God is able. God, I don't know how you're going to work this out, but I'm going to dare to trust you with my time. I'm not going to cheat you. I'm not going to cheat the other things that matter in my life. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to believe you are able. And there's something else about this decision. It needs to be concrete. Not just some vague, well, I'm going to spend more time on the things that matter and less time on these others that don't quite as much. You have to put a stake in the ground, and you have to get specific. I'm going to challenge you to think about that. Maybe it means that every day I will walk out of the office to get home by 5:30 or whatever time you set. You make that commitment, you keep it. Whether I feel finished or not. Maybe it means I'm going to schedule time in my calendar, whether it's a day a month, whether it's time in the morning, to spend some time alone with God. Even if I think I can't afford to, that time should go somewhere else. Maybe it means, I've got quotas at work. What if I set quotas and goals with regard to serving? The number of hours I'm going to use to serve or volunteer to help other folks. The same pastor who wrote this Choosing to Cheat book, Andy Stanley, he said one day a guy came to him, 37-year-old bicycle racer, who was so good he'd almost made the Olympic team in his 20s, and just his passion was bicycling. The bike was his rock. And he had another job during the week, but on the weekends, every moment he had went into bicycling. And it was killing his wife, his daughter. He just kept vowing he would spend less time with his bike, more time with his family, but he kept breaking the promise. He knew he had to do something drastic. And finally, he came to Andy and he said, here, I want you to have this. This is something God has wanted me to do for a long time. I've avoided it. I thought there was a way around it. There is not. So here it is. Have fun. And he gave Andy, his pastor, a $2,000 mountain bike and left. Now, I don't expect anybody to give me any mountain bikes this week, okay? I don't want them. But maybe you've been spending too much time with your Porsche. And, no, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. I don't want that either. But there's a real good chance, right? Somebody is holding the rock for you. And I suggest you think about driving that stake in the ground and making a decision, more than just some vague thing. Because it's kind of funny, when somebody challenges whether or not, you're cheating the things you're supposed to love or that you care about the most, you'll say, oh no, I love my family. What do you mean? And I'm sure you do, but here's the problem. I judge my love for the people that I care about, let's say in my life. I judge my love for my family by my feelings. My family judges my love for them by my calendar, by what I do. I look at my feelings and I say, I love them. But they look at what I do. That's the way it works. Do you know how to spell love? It's T-I-M-E. Can I spell it M-O-N-E-Y? No. Can I spell it G-O-O-D-I-N-T-E-N-T-I-O-N-S? Good intentions for those who lost track. No. T-I-M-E. Some of you need to have a very hard conversation about T-I-M-E. Talk about who's holding the rock. And it's not going to be easy, but our God is able. And some of you need to put a stake in the ground. There's another dimension to this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're under so much pressure to bow down, just like you and I are. And they say to Nebuchadnezzar in verse 17, the second half, they say, the God we serve is able to deliver us from you, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. We will not bend our knee. Our God is able, and he will deliver us. But we want you to know that even if he doesn't, wow, this is even if he doesn't faith. See, if you trust God with your time, our God is able. Our God is able to multiply your effectiveness. Our God is able to shower you with blessings. Our God is able to bring the needed financial resources you have in your life. Our God is able to give you advancement, maybe even give you opportunities you never dreamed would come your way. All of that may happen. But the question is, will you honor him with your time even if he does not? That's the question. That's faith. And I was thinking about this. For Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to honor God with their time meant they were going into a fiery furnace, a very real fiery furnace. And there are people in the world for whom they face such consequences for following God. None of us do. You know what our furnaces look like? Maybe I won't get promoted as rapidly. Maybe I'll have less money. Maybe I won't get the car I want. Maybe my resume won't look as impressive. or at home, because this isn't just about the marketplace. I know we have stay-at-home parents here. I know the incredible pressure there is on you to give your kids every imaginable experience, have them in every sport and activity, to keep your house perfect, to prepare meals that look like they could be on a cooking show. So the one thing I want to say today is, maybe you have to cheat your house or your image as the perfect spouse or parent. For crying out loud, cheat your house. Maybe instead of dusting, just write the word joy in the dust, right, on the house. I heard about a kid who came running to his mom one day, all freaked out. "Mom, is it true that from dust we were made and to dust we will return?" His mom said, "Yeah, honey, why do you ask?" The kid said, "Because I just looked under the bed and someone's either coming or going." So, somebody's coming, somebody's going, right? Cheat the house. If you trust God with your time, it will probably mean dying to something. Jesus talked a lot about that. It leads to life, but it means dying to something initially. And that's always kind of scary. Maybe it is money. Maybe it is promotion. Maybe it's the esteem of all the other parents in your network. Maybe it's your resume. Maybe it's your GPA. I don't know. And die to it. Our God is able. If I honor him with my time, my God is able to make up the gaps, to fill in. And I don't understand how the details, but I know God is able. One last part of this fabulous story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will not bow. So, of course, Nebuchadnezzar orders that the furnace is even more intensified. 7 times hotter, it says. He has them thrown in. And when he looks in, they're still alive. And Nebuchadnezzar says this, down in verse 24. He says, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" He goes on, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in that fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th," he says, "looks like a son of the gods." The old King James says, "looks like the Son of God." Who do you think that 4th guy might have been? And people have always speculated, maybe that was Jesus. Because here's the thing about Jesus. He shows up in the most unlikely places when people make room for him. There was no room for him in the inn. Okay, so he showed up in the barn. No room on Nebuchadnezzar's throne. Okay, doesn't force himself in there. He shows up in a furnace. You can squeeze him out, you can cheat, you can hand it off to somebody else, but when people decide, I'm going to honor God with my time, I will not cheat my God. I will commit to community. I'll serve in the ways he calls me to. I'll explore this faith, even I'm not sure what this is all about. When I say I love my family, my friends, I will not cheat them. I will not get to the end of my life and look back on it and see that people who should have mattered to me most got the least of my life and heart. I will not do it. It's stake in the ground time for some here. You try this and you see if Jesus doesn't show up in some unexpected way that you won't forget. So here's the challenge. The challenge is this. Through this Loving Mondays series, make a decision that you will trust God with your time, that you will honor God with your time. I don't know what that means for you. Maybe it means a set time you're going to leave work each day. Maybe it means carving out a certain number of hours that you will step aside from whatever the burden might be to do what you know matters most. Whatever it could be. Maybe it's deciding to protect weekends or making gatherings like this a priority as a family or as a person or whatever it is. I dare you. I dare you to take the risk of trusting God with your time and see if Jesus doesn't show up in some unforgettable way. It's part of his grace. Because here's the thing about our days. It's why Paul says, be careful. They go by so fast, don't they? I am now that old person who talks about how fast life goes. I don't know when it happened, but it did. And it just keeps speeding up. Be very careful how you live, Paul says. Redeem the time, because the days just keep going, one after the other, faster and faster. Where did it go? And maybe you look back and you think, I wish I'd done this differently. But you know what? That's the good news of grace. Because it's not too late for you. It's not too late for you. That's what grace is for. That's grace. As a friend of mine likes to say, if you're not dead, then you're not done, he says. Maybe you've been in denial about your cheating. Maybe you've been lying to yourself about who's holding this rock. It's not too late. Maybe it's time to surrender. But my challenge to you today is simple. Be very careful who you cheat. Bow your head with me. Let's pray. Oh God, I am so profoundly thankful for your grace, Lord. Because the truth is, I squander more time than I care to admit. And yet your grace calls me to better. There have been times when I've heard the music, the allure of ambition or drivenness or success, and found myself with the impulse to bow down, to drop everything else in pursuit of that goal. And Father, I thank you for your grace that calls me back. Lord, I know there are some hard conversations that need to happen among some people in this room today. Some people who need to talk about who's been holding the rock and what might need to change. And God, I pray for courage and grace in those conversations. I pray, Lord, you'll help us to live up to these things we claim to care so much about. That when the music is played, we won't be drawn in by that shiny image of success that seems to drive so much of our world. But instead, we'll boldly stand. We'll boldly stand. We trust you to fill in the gaps, Lord. And even if you don't, we trust you anyway. We surrender these parts of our lives to you as well. We will not find our identity in all the things everyone says we should. We find our identity in you as your child. And so we surrender to you all over again. I surrender to you all over again. In the name of the fourth man in the furnace,